Welcome to episode 266 of FBI Retired Case File Review with Jerry Williams. I'm a retired agent on a mission to show you who the FBI is and what the FBI does through my books, my blog, and my podcast case reviews with former colleagues. Today, we continue with a special series commemorating the 50th anniversary of modern-day women agents. Earlier this year, I learned that while training at the FBI Academy, each new agent's class honors one of the 88 Bureau agents and employees who have died in the line of duty, whether it be from the result of an accident or illness during the commission of their assignments or the result of a direct adversarial confrontation or by the hand of an adversary. I wanted to follow that tradition for this special series by honoring one of the 6 women agent service martyrs to highlight the commitment and sacrifices made by all women agents. I chose Martha Dixon Martinez. On November 22nd, 1994, Special Agents Martha Dixon Martinez and Michael John Miller, as well as Washington, D.C. Metropolitan Police Detective Hank Daley, were shot and killed inside the Metropolitan Police Headquarters building. At approximately 3:30 p.m., a gunman entered the cold case squad room to which the agents and detective were assigned and opened fire with a Tech-9 assault weapon. During the exchange of fire, a third agent, John Kuchta, was shot and seriously wounded. The gunman also died of gunshot wounds sustained during the incident. Now, next week in episode 267, retired agent John Kuchta will provide a detailed case review of the incident, and he'll share information about Mike Miller and Hank Daley. But today, it's all about Martha. In this episode, Monica Dentino, one of Martha's sisters, Kevin Dixon, one of Martha's brothers, and 6 of Martha's former co-workers, retired agents Icey Jenkins Craig, Bill Cole, Dan Reilly, Jeff Bedford, Jerry Bamel, and John Kuchta share loving memories about Martha and emotional stories about when they learned the tragic news. In your podcast app's description of this episode, there's a link to the show notes where you'll find photos of Martha Dixon, images from her career and the annual run and bike ride in her honor, along with links to where you can buy me a coffee, join my reader team, and learn more about me and my books. Thank you for your support. Now here's the show. Martha Dixon was born in January 1959 in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. After receiving her Bachelor of Science degree in biology from the University of Pittsburgh, Martha's goal was to work as a forensic scientist. Martha's sister, Monica Dixon Dentino, tells us more about those early years. First of all, I should tell listeners that right behind you is a lovely color photo of Martha. And it tells us that she is right there for you to see every day.
Always. I've talked to her and she's on my mind constantly every day. We were a grade apart in school. I am 18 months younger. We had a big family, and so space was at a premium, and we shared a bedroom. We just never had any space to ourselves, and that just builds up normal sibling stuff. I did help her pack her bags when she said she was going to run away. I was pretty happy about that. Aunt Marianne said, "You'll figure it out. You'll work it out. When you're adults, you'll be the closest of friends." She was right. As we grew older and started our adult lives, we got to be really close.
Now, you also have brothers, right?
There were 4 and 4. 4 brothers who she played with more than the girls, for sure. playing outside in the neighborhood, playing cops and robbers. She was always the first one to say, FBI, you're under arrest. So I know it was kind of on her radar. It was just part of the society and our culture that she was really aware of.
You sent me a picture of her when she was just a small child. How old was she in that picture?
3. It's such a beautiful picture of her. She just had a really natural shine and a little twinkle in her eye. It was a sweet picture of her as a baby.
And then, of course, you sent me pictures of her holding weapons and smoking cigars.
Yeah. And in high school, she was an athlete. She was a 3-sport athlete and really good at whatever she decided to play. She was tough that way. She was ready to engage in arguments. We were afraid of her, put it that way. And not just because I'm the little sister, but yeah, she was tough. My dad had a few side jobs. One of them was running concessions at a local swimming pool. As we got older, we were able to help and sell concessions. One day, some kid walked up, put his hand across the counter, opened the freezer, and pulled out an ice cream bar. And she went over and slammed the freezer door in his arm. You know, that protective instinct was really clear at that point. And I'm sure my parents at that time thought, oh, she's got something there, you know, something that is an instinct that you can't teach somebody. I think that's when my mom really felt like this might be something in her path that we don't even have an inkling of yet. She had a lot of friends too. So she had a social side that included a really wide range of friends. The other people you talk to will definitely affirm. And we were in high school at the time of Title IX. So it went from, if you were an athlete, you were a tomboy and you didn't fit into any other group. And then all of a sudden, Title IX changed things. At that time, we had a lot of overflow of friends. I was not the athlete she was. I was in one sport. She played volleyball, basketball, and softball. And those went through the summer as well. There were summer basketball leagues. She was really good, lettered at all the sports she could.
And that says a lot about how she was able to fit in on a SWAT team.
Oh, yeah. She didn't have any trouble making the physical requirements. She was also a runner after her high school days, and those organized sports were over. She started running. That's my impression, is that she was physically really capable. She didn't really express a tendency to law enforcement at that time. In fact, not even through college was that on her mind, but the path she took led her there, and she was really happy. She was a chemistry major in college. She went to the University of Pittsburgh, commuted every day, worked her way through college. She worked at Mercy Hospital in Pittsburgh at the blood lab with my sister Jan. They worked together most of the time. And it was just a regular chem lab job that she got herself through college doing. She graduated, and the biggest surprise of all is that she took this job in Little Rock, Arkansas at the state crime lab, working in their forensics lab. That was a big move for her to move away from home. But she was different, I guess, easier to relate to after being cooped up in a shared bedroom for all those years. By that time, I was married. So we both had our own adult lives and shared a lot of interest in each other's lives. When she moved to Little Rock and she was working in the state crime lab, she would go to continuing ed courses at Quantico. And that happened maybe, I don't know, every 6 months. She would call me and say, that was so cool. I really like doing that. I can't wait till the next one. She said at one point, I want to do this at the federal level. And so her goal was really to be a forensic chemist. But at that point, she had to train as a field agent and then at some point go back into chemistry. And so when she applied and got accepted, she was really happy, and we were all happy for her. We knew that this was her path. She was in one of the classes of 1987 at the FBI Academy.
So what did your mother and father think?
In general, a little bit of trepidation about law enforcement, but my parents were really happy that she was finding a path that she was happy with. To see her happy was, what every parent wants. I'm thinking that if she was able to join the SWAT team, she had a lot of resourcefulness that her coworkers and her bosses saw. And she never took that for granted. She realized that this was something she earned, and she was grateful to be part of it and knew she was a good team member. She was an aunt to 10 or 12 nieces and nephews at the time she got married, which was about 2 months before her death. She loved all those kids and asked for all of them to walk down the aisle in front of her at her wedding. So she just was really, really thrilled with all those little ones and was always the fun aunt for sure. And she was looking forward to family life and would have been a great mom herself. She just had a tender heart for those little kids. And I know in her work, she encountered families with kids and really had a soft spot for those families. In November of 1994, we were in Milwaukee, which is where I am now, outside of Milwaukee. I have 4 kids and I'm pregnant with 5. And I had the news on just during the day, taking care of kids, and heard about a shooting in DC. I actually called my dad and said, I'm so glad Martha is getting into the lab. At that point, she was talking about the forensic lab that was being built as part of the field office, I believe. And she was looking forward to doing what she had set out to do so many years ago, crime scene analysis. And then later in the day, he called me and said, it was Martha. I had a baby in my arms and I collapsed. And the oldest of my kids, Kelly, saw what was happening and took everybody, and she took care of them. And I really melted. And then I jumped up and I said, Dad, you have to be wrong. This is wrong. There's no way it was her. I'm going to make some calls. Just stop what you're doing. You sit there and I'll take care of the rest. So I did. I called the Milwaukee FBI. At that point, it was maybe 5 o'clock in the afternoon. I got an agent who referred me to the special agent in charge, who called me back and said, I'm really sorry, but it's true. So I called my dad and he said, I know it's true. He was just letting me have my little moment of denial. He was really strong. Milwaukee field office sent over some agents to help me out. And one of them was Cindy Daley, who is a really close friend to this day. And so they helped us pack up. We hit the road with 4 little kids, drove all night to Pittsburgh, had some time with my family. My parents helped us through it. And for living through what would be a parent's worst nightmare, they were really strong. And having each other, being together with my siblings really helped. There were 2 funerals, one in her home parish in Virginia and one in our home parish at St. Anne's in Pittsburgh. It was astounding, the scene between the funeral home and the church, the procession, people lined the streets. And that was just something I had never seen before. And they were out there for us, and that's moving. Between Mike and Martha and Hank's families, the FBI personnel that we were with at that time were very, very gracious. And we joined a brigade of people who never wanted to be in that group, but we were part of it at that point. And it wasn't long after that we decided that we needed to honor her memory. That discernment process included, what did she like the most? And it was running. and it was kids. We all knew how much she wanted a family and loved all of our kids. And the run to raise money to build playgrounds for kids just was the perfect combination. And that was a family decision. It healed us, no doubt.
So you were saying you have 4 brothers and 4 sisters. What's the age difference between all of you?
10 years. This is the decade where we're all in our 60s. We celebrate milestones with her in mind, milestones she should have been part of. She's a great example of living your best, doing everything you can with what you have. Our cousin Dennis, who is younger than us, was inspired by her and is now chief of police in a suburb outside of Pittsburgh. The FBI continues to recognize Martha's sacrifice year after year. This academy exercise that you talked about, how the classes pick an agent to honor, that's proof. When the FBI says we will never forget, that's true.
Monica wanted me to mention that her niece, Shauna, a New Jersey state trooper, was also inspired by Martha. Martha entered on duty with the FBI in June 1987. Her new agent's class was NAC 8713. Her academy classmate, retired agent Icey Jenkins Craig, shared a few stories from their time at the academy.
We had a very diverse class. We had several police officers, lawyers. One of the women was a professional pianist. We had 14 women and 30-some men, because we actually had a class of 52 at the beginning. And within the first couple of weeks, we lost several right away due to fit tests and testing out. So we had all 14 women, and we built a camaraderie with them. But Martha just stood out from the very first day. Nancy was my roommate, and Martha she just kind of flowed with Nancy and I. She's very quiet at first and just very demure, but just this beautiful woman that you could tell her mind was constantly working. We used to get up in the mornings at 5:30. She'd come down to the room, wake us up, and make us go run and work out with her, because sometimes I wasn't so motivated. And she was always a good motivator. So we'd go and run and talk. You could tell she's really family oriented. She just came from this beautiful family, and she talked about them quite extensively. Great personality, but a little quiet. We were in the gym doing defensive tactics, and they had us in several different circles, and we were going to wrestle. So Martha happened to be in my circle, and, guys and girls, and we were wrestling. And so Martha gets in the circle with one of the guys, and within no more than 2 minutes, she's got him down on the ground and she's got him pinned. And I think we were all stunned because nobody had seen that side of her. And it was one of those stories that you always think about because it was so quick. I have to tell you another story about Martha, because this was one of the meek shall overcome. We had the training not in Hogan Valley. We just did it in the dorms and the office buildings and, the dorm rooms. And it was a group of 4. We were looking for a fugitive, and we had an arrest warrant. So the 4 of us positioned as we're supposed to by the door, and one of the role players opens the door, and Martha was kind of on a very strong angle, and she was supposed to be looking in one of the corners inside the room. Well, the other 3 of us couldn't see what she could see. And this guy opens the door and he starts talking, and we're asking him, do you know this guy? Have you seen him? We're showing the picture. And the next thing you know, Martha goes busting through the door, grabs this guy, throws him on the ground, and got her cuffs on him. And the 3 of us are still standing at the door like, what are you doing? She goes, this is our fugitive. The 3 of us just stood there because she acted so fast and had him on the ground and cuffed. We just couldn't believe it. It was so funny. And the 3 of us are just standing there like idiots, basically. As the scenario was supposed to go, we were supposed to, interview the guy standing at the door and then let him open the door. And then the fugitive was going to take off. And that's not how it came out. She went right in and grabbed him. We continued on with our training, and we got to the day that we had to qualify for firearms, the first qualification after 7 weeks. So the Wednesday that we had to qualify as a class, there were 11 of us women that didn't qualify on that day. And Martha and I were two of the 11. So they made us stay the following Saturday to qualify in firearms for a job, basically. And if we didn't qualify on Saturday, we were sent home. Literally, you would pack your stuff and you would be gone by the end of the day. Thankfully, the very first qualification they ran us through, Martha and I both qualified, which was great. But we did lose 7 of the women that very day. So we were down to 7 women in the final class. And thankfully, we didn't lose any more after that. And I believe we lost 3 men that day also. But that was a tough day because we'd been together for 7 weeks. It was one of the days where the Bureau kind of rethought this. We need to start working on hand strength and wrist strength because we lost so many women. At that point, they didn't want to lose that many women for a specific thing. You know, if they lost you over several weeks because you weren't coming up to the qualifications of where they thought you should be, that was a different story. But to lose that big of a group in one afternoon was a little disheartening, I think, and sort of made them rethink some of the programs. Martha was a good shot. That Wednesday was very stressful. We had a test in the morning and then firearms qualification in the afternoon. So everybody was pretty stressed out. But when we graduated, Martha went down to Knoxville and decided that she wanted to try out for the SWAT team because they had no women on the SWAT team down there. And basically they told her that she couldn't try out for the SWAT team, at which point, being Martha, she said, "Oh, yes, I can." She ended up trying out and making the SWAT team in Knoxville and was an exceptional member of that team down there. Many years later, I ended up being a firearms instructor in Chicago, which was fun. And then I ended up teaching firearms at the academy, which was an amazing experience. So I went to Chicago, Nancy went to New York, and Martha went to Knoxville. So the 3 of us were pretty spread out with our offices. It wasn't until she came to WFO that we were able to really catch up again, since she was local. And at that point, I was on the director's detail. So I was with the director Sessions and the director Free at that point.
You were in the DC area on that day in November?
Yeah, I was actually on the phone with her and she was so excited because, you know, she got married and she's just really family oriented and she wanted children. And she had gone that morning to pick up a pregnancy test and she was actually taking a half day off so she could go home and take the pregnancy test. And we were on the phone and I'm like, well, get out of the office, go take it and let Nancy and I know. We're so excited. We want to know what's going on. Don't wait, just go take the test. She's like, I am. I just have something I want to put in the Bureau mail to you. And I said, no, it'll wait. Just go get your test. And then I was down at the firearms unit at this point teaching and I had a class. And so we hung up and I went to teach my class. And when I was done 4 hours later, I heard what was going on and that George had not heard from her. So basically at that point, we knew that she had been involved in the shooting. And then we just went from there. Nancy and I were both asked to be pallbearers for her funeral, which was very difficult and still is to this day. Very difficult. George might have known, but, you know, I don't know if he found out after the fact. You know, it was always one of those questions that was up in the air after that. I had lost a brother-in-law when I was very young. He was a police officer in Washington, D.C., and he was killed in the line of duty. And you know, I see what my sister still goes through 50 years later. And it just, you know, certain things just make you smile and laugh. And then other things just really hit home. Out of all the people in our class, I think if anyone was prepared for that situation, Martha was absolutely prepared for being in a close battle fight. But he got the jump on her. And you don't expect somebody like that to walk into your office. Just, yeah, horrific. You know, having been on the phone with her and telling her to get out of the office. And 4 days later, I got the envelope that she had sent. It was an article about one of her cases, which was awesome. But it hit home really hard. They say God takes the good ones. He took the good one when he took her. She was a sweetheart.
Martha married a fellow agent, George Martinez. Martha and George were married on September 10th, 1994. I didn't have the opportunity to speak with George, but I've included in the show notes a link to a Washington Post article where he talks about his and Martha's FBI love story. After graduating from the FBI Academy, Martha's first office of assignment was the Knoxville Division, where she tried out and earned a spot on the Knoxville SWAT team. Retired agent Bill Cole was the Knoxville SWAT team's team leader at that time. Here's Bill Cole.
I was introduced to Martha the first time probably soon after she got to Knoxville. Knoxville, fairly small office, only about 30 agents. And although we weren't on the same squad, and I knew everybody on the squad she was on, which was a foreign counterintelligence squad. And at the time she got there, I believe I was on a squad working primarily drug cases, but just met her and kind of got to know her just around the office. And then I think we maybe entered a race or two together, a 5K or 10K race. Martha was very athletic. She had been a basketball player, very competitive person. So she enjoyed any kind of athletic event or running and things like that, and recognized pretty quickly that she was in good physical condition. When she got there, I'd probably been in 17 years. I went in the FBI in 1971, so I'd been in quite a while. She was kind of a breath of fresh air. Like I say, we were a small office. There'd been a couple of female agents there before, but Martha was more competitive, and she was a very outgoing person. She became really well liked around the office real quickly among all the agents and the support personnel. She was very friendly, like I say, very outgoing, and good sense of humor. Martha helped out on lots of cases. She would always respond to bank robberies and any kind of sudden violent crime or a search or anything like that. She would always volunteer. She had worked in the lab, forensic laboratory in Arkansas before she got to Knoxville. So she was really good to have on a search. She was very knowledgeable about evidence and collecting of it. I got to Knoxville about 1984 and got on the SWAT team fairly quickly then, initially as a sniper observer and then later on as a assistant team leader and then the team leader. Probably by that time, it was probably 1989, 1990. And Knoxville was at that time kind of an older office. It was a difficult office to get to. And we were predominantly an older SWAT team, mostly late 40s, early 50s. Most of us were former military. A number of us were Vietnam veterans. And, it was interesting. Like I say, Martha was very well liked immediately in the office, and she was very competitive and in good physical condition. So on account of her personality, it was pretty quickly accepted, certainly by everybody on the SWAT team and the agent in charge then. And I think she very first went on the SWAT team either right before Sterling became a supervisor, and I took over right about the same time that we had to transition. But, she was a good choice. She and a couple of other young agents had come in, so it kind of revitalized our SWAT team to some extent because they were in good physical condition. They had a lot of enthusiasm. She fit right in immediately and participated in everything. We have a SWAT region, which was Atlanta office, Birmingham, and Knoxville. In the training we did, one time the Atlanta team and our team went over to Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, and trained with Marine Corps special operations people. And Martha was very much a part of that. We did some things that we probably weren't supposed to do at the time. One of them was rappelling out of helicopter. And Martha, she only weighed about 130 pounds. And I remember when she was rappelling out of the helicopter, it was hard to get her down to the ground. She was kind of flapping in the wind behind the helicopter, but finally got her down to the ground. But like I say, she'd try anything, and she was just always enthusiastic. If she was teased, she'd tease back. She could give as good as she got. In 1991, at Talladega Federal Prison, there was a riot in what they call the Alpha Unit. They took 9 hostages. Our team in Atlanta and Birmingham's teams all went to Talladega, and initially were just security cordoning off the prison unit. And then the hostage rescue team came in. After about 9 or 10 days, it was determined that we needed to go in and rescue the hostages. So with the hostage rescue team in the lead, we practiced in another unit for several nights. One thing about a prison, it's harder to break into prison than it is to break out. The hostage rescue team had explosives experts, and they put explosive charges on the 2 doors to blow the doors. And one of them went off initially. And we were able to go into that door. The other door went off late, and the explosive did. We had a couple of people get knocked down, and Martha was one of them. But She jumped back up and went on in, and we secured the hostage. The hostages were all rescued. Martha, she did well. 911 in Knoxville got a call from a woman calling from a truck stop, and she needed to go to her house, get her belongings. Her husband had kicked her out of the house. It was a domestic abuse situation, and she wanted somebody to go with her. So 2 deputy sheriffs came out in 2 separate cars. And when the deputies arrived, the woman's husband had a .30-06 rifle with a scope on it and shot both the deputies. Didn't kill them, shot one in the arm, shoulder, the other one in the head. By the time Knox County got the other officers out there, he was gone. And since it was close to Oak Ridge, close to the government reservation, they asked us to come and help. And our SWAT team went out that evening. It was late in the day. And we came back the next morning. They gave us an area over by the lake where there was just a few houses, some occupied, some not. So we went and we were searching down through there in a wedge formation. And we had rotated people on the point so they would be alert. And at that time, Martha and a fellow named Jim Bentley, a former Special Forces officer from Vietnam, were on the point. Martha saw somebody in a ravine with camo clothes on, and he yelled to her, "Don't shoot, I'm one of you all." Almost immediately heard a gunshot, and we took cover. And then one of our guys worked around and looked down the ravine, and Hedrick had shot himself. Now, whether he did it intentionally or he was drawing his .45 and accidentally shot himself, who knows? But he shot himself in the chest, and he died within 2 or 3 minutes. Again, Martha, she did a good job, made a good decision, took cover quickly, and was a big part of what it ended up being successful in that nobody else was injured. I can remember a couple of basketball games where we took on some other team, and she didn't start a fight, but she was so competitive that she would take anybody on. I do remember one other story. I had bought a car at a dealership, and Martha had decided that she wanted to buy a new car. So she asked if I would go with her to the dealership and have the salesman, who was nice, who I liked, to show her a car. So I took her out and went to the dealership. And the salesman I had talked to wasn't there. So another salesman came out to talk to us and asked me if I wanted to buy a car. I said, no, I'd already bought one, but Martha did. And he was a little bit chauvinistic. I think he maybe called her honey or something like that. And you could tell he really pissed her off. So he gets a car for her to drive, and she gets in the car in the driver's seat. He gets in the passenger seat. I got in the back seat. And he kind of gave her some directions about what to do. Asked her if she was ready, and she said, yeah. Well, she just floors it, takes off out of the parking lot, flying up the road, going around the turns and everything. Finally comes back. The guy's kind of gripping his seat. He says, well, you're what we would call an aggressive driver. She was just a joy to have around. She would have probably ended up being a great supervisor, agent in charge somewhere, if she hadn't had an untimely death. I was in the office and the phone rang, and I got a call, and it was the former agent in charge here, Bill Ball, who had been transferred up to Washington and was at headquarters. Ball called and told me that Martha and a couple of other agents had been shot, and he didn't know anything other than it didn't look good, he said. So he called back then and said that, sure enough, Martha had been shot and had died. So I went downstairs and told the other guys that were still around. It really cast a pall over the office. A number of us went up to her funeral, and we put a plaque in the reception area, a picture of Martha, and after that.
After her first office assignment in the Knoxville Division, Martha received a transfer to the Washington Field Office, WFO. The transfer meant that she would be closer to the FBI laboratory and her dream of working forensics for the FBI one day. I spoke with retired agent Dan Reilly, who often spoke with Martha about her interest in forensics and her work on the WFO evidence response team. Here's Dan Reilly.
I met Martha when she arrived at Washington Field Office and was assigned to our second gang squad, which had just been initiated in, I want to say, 1992, 1993 time period. After we had success with our first gang squad, I was on that. And Martha was assigned to the second gang squad with Joe Zapata, a detective that I knew from the 5th District DC Police. And she was really working the weed and seed program. But at that point, we were sort of having conversations back and forth about how to be successful with the gang cases and talking about forensics. And I found out then that she was a forensic scientist, and I knew that she had a great deal of knowledge. I just remember her and I talking about forensics a lot, primarily because in the early 90s, DNA was brand new. There were some advances being made on fingerprinting and some extraordinary advances being made in examining crime scenes using alternate light sources. And all of those areas I was familiar with and had been using since I became an agent. I had worked in the lab and knew about the electromagnetic scale and how that affected the lighting in a crime scene. And we would talk about those kinds of issues. And so I knew she was well informed and more educated about it than I was. I'd been picking up stuff basically on my own, but she was educated in it and had some technical background in the areas. So we discussed it quite a bit, but also talked about my own experiences with some of the crime scenes that I'd done going back to the Reagan assassination case. She had this sort of advanced thinking that the evidence response team was going to be the future of how the FBI would handle forensics. And I wasn't there yet. I was like, Martha, you got to do your own scenes, that kind of thing. And you got to keep working at it. And the guys that are being trained in that really need to have a lot more hands-on experience with criminal cases, which I didn't think they were getting at the time. But so she and I went back and forth about that. But she joined the team. I believe she was a team leader on the evidence response team because there were 3 teams at WFO at that time. Then she transferred over to the cold case squad, which again was close in proximity to us. We were all on the 8th floor of the Washington field office building there on Half Street Southwest. I continued to talk and she continued to bug me. She told me that I needed to get on the evidence response team because most of the people didn't have the experience that both she and I had. So it really came down to that. She would kind of, needle me and harass me a little bit about it. And I would tell her that, I was too busy and which I was, frankly, but I didn't have the time to add something else to what I was doing. The day of the shooting at DC Police Headquarters, I heard right away that she and John Kuchta were there. They were friends, both of them. And Hank Daley was a friend. And so, we were all just trying to get any information that we could. And eventually we got sent to the various locations like the hospital and to the crime scene to do the work that we had to do. I ended up working at the hospital with Mike Miller's family. But I was particularly struck by the fact that we lost Martha. She was such a good person. I mean, and a top agent, knew how to do the basic work that needed to be done, but also she had that sense of using forensics as a resource. And that's what we needed in the city at the time, because that was really one of our problems that we were dealing with in terms of the successful prosecutions of the cases, is we needed to have people that were up to date on what was going on in forensics. And Martha was one of those people. I missed her a great deal when she was shot. I remember saying at that point that I was going to have to join the evidence response team because Martha would have wanted me to get off my butt and to do the extra work that I had to do in order to do that. And so she pushed me in that direction. And so I did it in honor of her. Her work as an agent was heroic. Her last battle was heroic. And I just, it's very difficult to think about those days without, getting emotional. When I joined the evidence response team at the time, they were looking for a team leader and a coordinator. The coordinator was going to have to make a decision about all 4 of the teams because WFO had to enlarge its ERT capacity to 4 teams. And so I just went ahead and put in for the coordinator position, which meant I was overall responsible for all 4 teams. At that point is when I told the administration of the office that we needed to change the name of the team to honor her. And that's what we did.
As Dan mentioned, Martha was assigned to the cold case squad at WFO. Her squad mate, retired agent Jerry Bamel, explains the squad's mission, and shares stories about Martha's easygoing personality.
I'm Jerry Bamel. I was assigned to the Joint FBI Metropolitan Police Department's Homicide Major Case Team from April 1993 to October 1996. The Homicide Major Case Team was the first of its kind formulated in the United States, which was a team consisting of FBI agents and local detectives, and we worked cold case homicides in Washington, D.C. that were not being addressed because of the influx of new homicides that came in. As new homicides came in, then those homicides that were not being able to get resolved kind of fell cold, and this joint unique team was formed, working cold cases to bring some closure to families that needed closure. It was the first of its kind in the United States because it was such a violent time in Washington, D.C. I worked with Martha and the other agents. It was a small, close-knit group of FBI agents and detectives, and we would help each other on each other's cases. We would help out on interviews. Even though I wasn't her primary partner, Jeff Bedford was, I had another partner on the squad. We would all work together to address many of the leads and work that needed to be done to resolve these cold case homicides. I always felt comfortable working with her. She was very strong, very capable. Martha just had a particular way with individuals. People felt comfortable in her presence. If there were additional witness interviews or neighborhood screenings that needed to be done, the group would work together that way. We had an office at the cold case squad. The cold case squad was led by two individuals, one a supervisory special agent with the FBI and Sergeant Hank Daley from MPD. We had desks there within the cold case squad, but we also had work and desks that we had at the FBI so that we can also do paperwork and the like there. Martha also had a stash of chocolate in her desk drawer, and I knew where that stash was. And, she kept refilling that stash of chocolate for all of us. And when you needed a little chocolate buzz, Martha supplied all of us with her chocolate stash. She was really very good and kind that way. Within the office itself, there was a large table, and myself, my FBI partner, and my detective partner were laying out a case file of information that we had as I was scheduled to meet with an assistant U.S. attorney to present a case to him on a cold case homicide that I had been able to resolve. Martha was in the squad, as well as Mike Miller and Sergeant Daley and John. Martha and I had been kibitzing and joking as it was very close to Thanksgiving, and Martha was going to be preparing her first turkey. And I was jokingly saying to her, why don't you just take your American Express credit card, head on over to the Sutton Place Gourmet in Alexandria, Virginia, and have them cater an entire turkey dinner for the first turkey dinner that you would be making. And we just bantered back and forth on that. It was a lighthearted and wonderful repartee that we were having just at that time. When we were ready for that scheduled meeting at the U.S. Attorney's Office, we closed up the case file and walked out of the MPD office, and we passed three individuals right in the hallway. As you exited the cold case squad office, you had a stairwell down to the left and elevators, and we passed these three individuals and then walked down the stairwell and walked over to the U.S. Attorney's Office, which was two buildings away from the cold case office in this MPD headquarters. As soon as Jay and I got to the U.S. Attorney's Office, my pager and his pager started going off with 911 pages. I called our office back at Washington Field and spoke to an agent who told us that there was a hostage situation in the cold case squad. Jay and Bob and I immediately turned, and Jay and I started to run back to the MPD headquarters. We saw a helicopter landing at the time. We ran and we were able to get Hank Daley on a stretcher and got him into the helicopter. That was the Park Police's Eagle One, and they then transported Hank off to the hospital. We got into the building as we encountered the chief at the time, told him that the building was secure, but we told the chief that we were on the cold case squad. And he, of course, brought us up onto the third floor where the cold case office was formed. MPD SWAT was starting to make entry. Jay and I were both on the FBI Washington Field SWAT teams. We told them that we knew the layout of the office. We were on the SWAT team. Please allow us to join their stack in order to make entry. However, they said they had the jurisdiction, they had the floor plans, which we helped create, And then they made entry into the cold case squad and then found Martha, Mike, and the shooter deceased. I would say that, and I have said this before, it was probably 20 to 30 seconds after we passed those three individuals that they walked into the cold case squad and the shooting occurred. It was hard for me to comprehend why the good Lord had saved me, Jay, and Bob, because it was only a matter of 20 to 30 seconds after we passed those individuals that we entered the stairwell and they walked into the cold case squad. Because of the structure and construction of the building, we did not hear any of the shooting as we were in the stairwell and were exiting the building and did not know what was happening. And for whatever reason, my life was saved, although I found out 6 months later why the good Lord saved me in another incident I was involved in. To lose three colleagues and friends on cold case on November 22nd was hard and traumatic. We on the squad, of course, were mourning the loss not only of Martha, but Special Agent Mike Miller and Detective Sergeant Hank Daley. That was a very, very traumatic time for us. I had a hard time trying to understand why I was not in the office at that time. I was a SWAT agent and always felt I could have stopped him. However, who's to say that he would not have walked up to me as the first individual he encountered rather than him walking up to Hank and engaging with Hank as the first individual. But as I mentioned, I began to understand 6 months later why I was saved at the cold case squad in order for me to stop the killing in that shooting that I was engaged in back in Greenbelt, Maryland on May 28, 1995, 6 months later, when we lost Special Agent Billy Christian. Martha was a very special person. I actually had a number of informants, but one informant in particular was a female informant that was providing me information regarding drug activity and gun activity in her particular neighborhood. And that cooperating witness felt extremely comfortable when Martha was with me. Martha just had this ease and relationship, and people felt comfortable with her and in her presence. And so I was very, very pleased that Martha was able to accompany me on many of the debriefings that I had with this woman. Interestingly, after the names of the agents that were lost were published by the media, this informant cooperating witness called me to ask me to extend her personal condolences to the Dixon family. I mean, interestingly, here is an individual working to have a downward departure on her sentence that she had for a crime that she committed, but felt a special relationship with Martha that she would call me on that and I would pass her condolences on to the family, which I did. The Dixon family, of course, was mourning the loss of Martha, and I was designated by the FBI to be the contact person for the Dixon family. And I took that role that the Bureau had given me very, very seriously and have maintained contact well over 25 years with Martha's brothers and sisters and have a very special relationship with them. The Dixon family has established the Martha's Run as a memorial to Martha, which has gone on for 20 plus years. Following my assignment on the cold case squad, I was assigned to the International Terrorism Squad, and then I was subsequently selected as the FBI representative to the U.S. Embassy in Singapore in the legal attaché office. Stayed on when I was recruited by a company. So I was based in Singapore for 11 years and didn't have an opportunity to come back to the United States for Martha's Run. And so this past April, for the first time, I was able to walk Martha's Run. I walked it in an hour and 48 minutes. I was the last to finish, but Martha's brothers and Jeff Bedford were there at the finish line welcoming me across. And then following that, the Dixon family invited me to join them to Martha's gravesite, where we laughed, told stories, cried, and just reminisced about our relationships with Martha.
Jerry's bond with Martha's family and his support of the Martha Fund is important to him and other members of the cold case squad who take part in the run and the bike ride. Retired agent Jeff Bedford provides intimate details about the ambush and what took place immediately after the tragic event. He also talks about how the FBI and the Dixon family remember the ultimate sacrifice Martha made that day. Here's Jeff Bedford.
So prior to cold case homicide, the squad actually did exist at WFO. Prior to us going to it, there was a task force created by the police department called the Violent Crime Response Team. And 5 or 6 agents were assigned to that task force, which disbanded at some point 6, 8, 10 months after we started to work on them. And they moved us all over to the cold case homicide squad. The morning that the shooting took place, Martha had a case that she was working on involving, I think it was a witness to one of her cases. And we went into Southwest DC to try to find the guy, which was next to impossible because you knock on a door and they'll, of course, tell you they've never heard of the guy, and they keep trying to deflect you and distract you. And we had no luck finding whoever it was we were looking for. So we got back to the office around lunchtime, and Martha said that she was going to go review some cases at PD headquarters, and I stayed there to take care of some of my own paperwork. I learned about the shooting, I think it was mid-afternoon. I don't remember the time exactly. And several of my squad mates went over to MPD headquarters, which was a block and a half from our office. But since a bunch of people went, I stuck around the squad to handle anything that I needed to cover there with respect to the shooting and questions coming from management, WFO, et cetera. So they had some person and place to go to get answers as far as we knew about what was going on regarding that shooting. As the afternoon went by, lots of inquiries were coming in. We were getting conflicting information about who was shot and who was maybe killed, but who was still alive. And so it just took a bunch of sort of coordinating to try to figure it all out. By the time the nighttime rolled around and our squad mates had been moved to various hospitals, we sort of felt like it was our role to be liaison with families and the hospitals and anything else that came through WFO about the shooting. And sometime later that evening, when Mike Miller was declared deceased, myself and another agent went to the Miller's family residence to inform them that that had happened. That evening, I found out that Martha and Hank hadn't made it. The day after the shooting, John had been transferred to an ICU at a hospital in DC. His wife met us there. I was with Ed Dixon, the supervisor of the cold case squad. John had tubes down his throat and he was lying down, couldn't talk, and he couldn't really move. So he made a motion for someone to give him a pen because he couldn't communicate. And he couldn't see what he was writing because he was laying down, but he wrote on his bed sheet, "Who's dead?" So I had to give him that bad news. He was so worked up that he started choking, especially with a tube down his throat. It was horrible. There's always been a little bit of a question about who shot who, when, and why Martha and the bad guy ended up actually in a fight without weapons. But at some point, his weapon was shot and weapon was rendered useless. Martha, at the beginning of the shooting with him, got shot once in the wrist, in her right wrist, and had to drop her weapon because she couldn't hold it. So they ended up in a fist fight. He ended up grabbing her weapon from the floor and using it to kill her and then kill himself. Before I retired, I was the unit chief of the new agent training unit. One of the things they always did during the first week when people went to training was they brought them into the firearms unit, basically reaffirmed to brand new agents their first week there, you can get killed in this job, and talked about some of the shootings. One of the things they had was Martha's service weapon, and they passed it around for everybody to hold it. The memory of the FBI agents who were killed, of course, have been memorialized in all the Martyr walls that I believe are in every FBI field office, which is kind of nice. I think it was last October, they rededicated the Washington field office to all of the agents who were from WFO who had been killed in the line of duty. So that was quite nice, too. A bunch of Martha's family were there, as were Mike Miller's family. So there's yearly remembrance of the shooting and those who gave the ultimate sacrifice. So it's quite nice to participate in those every year that I possibly can, which has been almost all of them since the shooting took place. One of the big remembrances for Martha was when they dedicated the Pittsburgh field office in her name. And I went to that ceremony, and Louis Free and Director Mueller were at that dedication. So it was quite nice. Every year, the Dixon family holds a 10K memorial run. The proceeds go to what's called the Martha Fund, which is set up to either build or improve playgrounds in the area. Martha had a whole bunch of nieces and nephews, loved them. And I think she really would have loved to have seen the proceeds from her race go to help with those playgrounds. I think I've run that 10K probably 20 times at this point. They've had it probably 25 times. It's not a fun race with all the hills that are around Pittsburgh, but got to do it. One of Martha's brothers organizes also a bike, not really a race, it's a survival bike ride in Martha's name that goes from DC to Pittsburgh. And I do ride a bike, but not quite that many miles. And I don't have what Kevin Dixon calls time in the saddle to survive a ride that's that long. When I think of Martha, I think of a woman who was happy-go-lucky, joking around a lot, loved her job, loved the people she worked with. Every year on the anniversary of the shooting, we all stop for a minute and think, what would they be like now? I look back, but I imagine what would have been too.
Retired Agent John Kuchta will never forget what happened that day. He has spoken about the ambush at the FBI Academy and during law enforcement training sessions, but seldom before a public audience like a podcast. But he agreed to speak with me about working with Martha on the Cold Case Squad and about that day when Martha, Mike, and Hank were killed, and he survived.
Martha and I, we grew up, we didn't know this, right? When we were growing up, my neighborhood and her neighborhood were right next to each other. She grew up in the Castle Shannon section of Pittsburgh. I grew up in the city, but like the city limit of my neighborhood bordered up to Castle Shannon. Never knew each other, but we knew the same places back home. And then also we went to the same university. We both went to the University of Pittsburgh. She's a few years older than me. You know, she's a veteran agent by the time and a second office agent, which meant a lot. But yeah, I mean, it was an instant Pittsburgh connection and Steeler fan and, you know, everything else that goes along with it. Martha, Mike Miller, and I landed on this violent crime task force, and it was short-lived. It was only about 6 months, and we were still on Squad C-21, but we were moved over to the Cold Case Squad. But during that time, you know, we were augmenting the 7th District detectives in Washington, D.C., Metropolitan Police 7D or 7th District, going on a search warrants and investigating alongside them and working violent crime and gang-related cases. 7D at that time was the worst part of the city and had the highest violent crime rate and murder rate in the city. And Washington, D.C. was the murder capital. So it was like the worst part of the city that law enforcement was trying to clean up and quell the violence. You know, it was a dangerous time. It was during those dangerous, dark times that, you know, we looked out for each other. We trusted each other. You always knew with Martha that she had your back. And, you know, we had been on plenty of situations, searches, and high risk arrests and things like that with our MPD partners during that time period. And the level of violence in the city, you never felt safe, but you always felt safe with your partners, right? A few things about Martha. She was the first female SWAT trained agent. She came out of Knoxville division. I was a young pup at that point. I was only a couple years in the bureau. And here was a veteran, solid case agent who had a lot of experience and probably in that mid-level part of her career where you've been through a lot. You're getting that experience and you're imparting it on others. So, you know, she had strong judgment and she was tactically trained. Martha was an optimist. She was always positive and saw the good in just about everybody. I don't know anybody in the Washington field office that didn't love being around her and enjoy working with her. She was just a good person, good, solid person. On that fateful day, I was in There was two rooms. There was a side room, and that room is separated from the main room with like this makeshift, what do you call it, modular furniture type wall. It's like carpet covered, and that's important for the story because it's not a hardened wall between us. There's no actual doorway. There's somewhat of an opening that you have to go through, but it's these makeshift walls put together. Martha's working at her desk in the main part of the cold case homicide squad. Hank Daley, Mike Miller, and myself are in that side room. The shooter and two informants came through the main room. They went into our room, and that's when the shooting happened where we were. Now, as I said earlier, Martha always had your back. And when she knew her friends were in danger on the other side of that wall, responded. She got up from her desk. She was tactically trained. She drew her weapon. The shooting probably lasted in our room a matter of seconds. The gunman had a fully automatic Cobra M11 machine pistol. He was a convicted felon with prior history for gun offenses, and he was involved in a violent street gang in Washington, D.C. He was a main member of the First and Kennedy Street crew. He was intent on killing police officers that day. He was on a suicide mission. He had really nothing to lose. And from his cognitively distorted state, his twisted view of things, he had everything to gain by killing as many police officers as he could. After our shootout, he comes back out into the main area through the opening. Martha is responding, knowing that we are on the other side of this makeshift wall. And I think looking back on that, and this is, a detriment, I guess, of law enforcement, but we have to live by a set of rules, right? We have crossfire situations. We can't shoot wildly. Every shot of Martha's had to count because she knew her friends were on the other side of that wall. And although she's facing down the gunman feet apart from each other, she's outgunned. He has a fully automatic, which again was completely illegal, firearm that was, not only did he illegally possess it, but it was remanufactured to fire full auto. So all he has to do is to press a trigger, and you have a 39-round magazine, and bullets just fly out with a single trigger press. Plus a Cobra M11, even though it's a cheap Saturday night special type of machine pistol, it has a longer barrel, so the barrel speed is faster than what we're issued with our Sig Sauer 9mm handgun. So he can just spray wildly. As a criminal bent on killing people, he doesn't have to worry about who's behind anyone. He doesn't have to worry about bullets going through walls. He doesn't have to worry about that. He can just spray wildly. And so outgunned, she faces him as he comes out of our room and into her room, and her shots had to count. She fires multiple times and hits him multiple times. But again, outgunned, he shoots her multiple times with his machine pistol. As she falls to the ground and is either dead or dying on the ground, he takes her weapon and he turns it on himself and he kills himself. Before there was the idea of suicide by cop and things like that, he was on a mission, assuming his mind that his mission was over at that point, and he couldn't turn his own gun on himself because during this entire melee, our shootout, her shootout with him, one of the bullets strikes the bottom plate of the magazine that's feeding into his machine pistol. And all the bullets drop on the floor in that area where Martha's in the shootout with him. I believe the final FBI report attributed one of her bullets knocking out the plate. And it's probably forensically consistent, right? Because all those bullets were dropped out in that area. So his firearm is inoperable. So he takes her gun and he turns it on himself. Martha didn't just stand her ground in insurmountable odds and knowing she's outgunned and knowing that, you basically don't stand a chance, but she came to the rescue of her friends. I'm here today because others gave their life, right? She gave her life. She confronted him and stopped him in his tracks, from going further. And not only that, not just me, but had he left that room, that was a full building. Martha's legacy lives on by her works, her deeds, her actions. The FBI, the Dixon family, others that worked with her, they don't let that legacy die. Martha was an avid runner in incredible shape, running races and half marathons and 5Ks and 10Ks. And I mean, this is pretty much what she did every weekend, compete in various races. They have a Martha run every year in Pittsburgh, and they've had it every year since, this horrific loss. So her legacy lives on in that. There's another event her brother Kevin started, which is a bike ride, but it goes from the Washington field office and it finishes at the Martha Dixon FBI field office in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My wife and I were fortunate pre-COVID, I think it was 2019 or 2020, that we participated in a portion of that, the last part of that race through, we picked it up down on the trail well outside of Pittsburgh, and we rode it through. It was a moving event, to say the least, because this many years have passed and her valor, her sacrifice is still recognized. And as we got off the trail and came into a really busy part of the city, which is the South Side area where the FBI office is built, we had a motorcade from the Pittsburgh police, motorcycle police, shut down like main thoroughfares and arteries for us to finish and go down the road, down Carson Street, to the Pittsburgh office where there was a ceremony that took place there with media. And then afterwards, the families and everyone got together at a restaurant. There was an outpouring of support from the Pittsburgh office. There was an outpouring of support from Pittsburgh police. There was various police agencies from the tri-state Pittsburgh area that participated in that bike ride and in that final ceremony at the office. And they do that every year. They've done that every year. It raises money for the Martha Fund. It's only fitting, right, that the FBI field office in Pittsburgh would be named for Martha. I think it's only fitting, to honor her sacrifice. No better citizen, no better daughter from the city of Pittsburgh, no better representative than Martha Dixon to have that building named after her. I don't think there would be anyone else that could fit the shoes.
Next week, in episode 267, John will review the events before, during, and after the November 22nd, 1994 shooting, and, in addition to Martha, share his memories of Mike Miller and Hank Daley. At the beginning of this tribute, we heard from Martha's sister, Monica, who shared loving memories about growing up with Martha. Their brother, Kevin Dixon, also spoke to me about the Dixon family and how they've turned their sadness and grief into beautiful memorials that will honor Martha's memory forever. Here's Kevin Dixon.
We really were just taken right off our feet and probably stayed like that for about a year. I remember my mother about a year after saying, I noticed myself laughing today. And that was a revelation. It was a sort of surprise to everybody. We had all had the same thought that we were just walking around in a daze for quite a while. We were all in a very deep hole. 8 kids born in 10 years, so close, so tightly knit. And we fought like cats and dogs growing up. I mean, we were just jammed into this house together and tripping over each other. And when we all moved out, we became best friends because we missed each other. We didn't know what we had when we were kids, and we learned to appreciate it in our 20s. Martha and I were born about 3 years apart. I was living in a little community called Smithville, New Jersey, which was in Atlantic County near Atlantic City. And we were planning a hunting trip. It was near Thanksgiving. We were going up to Pennsylvania to go deer hunting, which the season begins right after Thanksgiving. 2 days before Thanksgiving, I was at my friend's house, and we were just making plans for our trip. And his wife came downstairs and said, "Your wife called and your father called and needs you to go home right away." And I go home and I get on the phone. My father's very quiet voice says, "There was a shooting in D.C. today." And I anticipated what he was going to say. And I just started saying, no. And I'd never seen or heard my father crying before, but he was sobbing the words out to me. And I dropped to my knees. You always hear so many people say that, or you see that. And it was like, I didn't even realize that I was on the floor. My darling little daughter, who was 1 year old at the time, every time I would come home from work, I would drop on the floor and she would come running and tackle me and we would wrestle. And so there I was on the floor and she came running over and just took a flying leap on top of me. And she was laughing as I was dealing with this moment. So there I was, laying on the floor, contemplating the fact that my daughter, who was 1 year old, would never know Martha. That's the thought that I had. That was the moment of clarity of what was happening. It just made it all the more painful. My first thought was, I have to go to George, her husband. I have to go help him. I have to go be with him. A few hours later, I got on a plane to meet my two brothers in Washington, D.C. that night, and we certainly had a moment together. We were ushered around by the FBI when I got there. The FBI put us in a hotel room, and that was it. That was that day. It was 2 days before Thanksgiving in 1994. We were in a deep, deep hole of grief and depression. This year, I had the opportunity to visit the Washington Metro Police Department and actually walk through the space where all these things happen, these terrible things. Jerry Bamel set this up for me. I was hosted by Detective Danny Whalen of the MPD, who actually walked me through the space and showed me where everything was. The space had been reallocated and being reused, of course, so many years later, but I was struck by how small the space was. I couldn't get the word intimate out of my mind, as terrible as that sounds in relation to this incident. They had to be smelling each other's breath. It was so close, so tight. And that made the incident so much more powerful in my memory because I had seen sketches of what happened. And I was a person that wanted to know every detail. Not everybody in the family did. Most didn't. But I just happened to be that person. And I wanted to walk through there and feel it, see it. And it really made me understand that this was a point blank incident that just had to be so horrific. And when you talk about John Kuchta laying there, surviving the incident, he was only a few feet away from Martha when she went down. Right after her death, in the immediate aftermath, thousands of dollars came pouring in, donations for whatever. And we were trying to figure out what to do with that. About a year later, we kind of figured out that Martha was a great athlete in high school. She was an avid runner, and she was devoted to her nieces and nephews. So we just came to the conclusion that building playgrounds in her memory would be an ideal way to keep her memory alive, but it would also serve the community in a larger way by, serving the kids that she so loved. She would have been a wonderful mother, and we'll never meet those kids. She never had. So we get to play, beneficiaries in Martha's name to kids who are going to enjoy time on these playgrounds that are going to be built in her name and in her memory. And in that regard, we get to extend her legacy that will hopefully last even beyond our lives. We've been doing the run now since, I believe, the very first run was 1997. The Martha Dixon Memorial Fund was established around 1996. We had a run that took place up in the center of Mount Lebanon, our hometown, right in the middle of the downtown. We closed the street on a state highway and started the run there. And that was 1997. We're talking over 2 years later. And that's about how long it took us to, dig out of our grief and to put our lives to work with this mission that we had undertaken. The race started uptown and ran past our home. They changed the route in 1998. And since then, that has been the designated route. We think there have been a total of 25. We missed 2 due to COVID. This was the first year that we asked for some professional assistance. They set everything up. They set up the electronic finishes. They have all the times and they publish everything. And they set up the kits that the runners pick up, the packets that they pick up beforehand. And we recognize that our years are becoming more advanced. I think we have probably more years behind this than we do in front of us at this point. We were looking to turn the reins over to somebody to keep it going in the same manner or better that we had always put into it. And this was sort of a good pickup point when we were getting back into it. We're really excited about next year and improving on it and getting it back in full swing. The fund, since its inception, has participated in 20 projects at various levels. crowning achievement took place in 2007 when Mount Lebanon, our hometown, authorized the construction and awarded a bid for the construction of our goal was to build a playground and name it Martha's Playground. And Mount Lebanon did that with some very heavy participation from the Martha Fund. The Martha Fund donated $50,000 towards that. Our secondary mission still goes on, and that is to continue to participate in playground projects financially such that each of those projects will have some recognition of Martha's legacy within that project. At one point last year, when we were riding in a bicycle ride, we were able to donate some funds from the Martha Fund towards a playground in the city of Pittsburgh. And that crosses over into a project that we started with Martha's Ride, which is a bicycle ride. Here's the funny story behind that. I sat down at a breakfast event. I think it was around 2007 or 2008. And I sat down next to somebody. We introduced ourselves, and she said her name was Martha. And I said, I had a sister named Martha. She recognized that I used the word had, and I told her the story. And she said, you have to meet my son. He's a police officer, and he rides in the Police Unity Tour, which I had never heard of. So I get to meet her son. I made a donation to his Police Unity Tour ride. He invited me down to Washington, D.C. when the bikes arrived. I stayed for the Candlelight Vigil, which was a ceremony that is held at the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial every year on May 13th. The Police Unity Tour, it's for law enforcement, retired law enforcement, and surviving family members. I put my name in. So this is March. It's the end of March, and the ride is 200 miles, and it's in May. So I have like 5 weeks to train. I bought a road bike, a good bike, and I did it. And the first year I rode into the memorial. And if you've ever seen the Police Unity Tour ride into the memorial, you're being greeted by tens of thousands of people. And I had no idea that that was going to happen. I couldn't believe it. It was one of the most emotional experiences. The whole ride, of course, I was thinking of Martha, that I was involved in something that was doing the same thing that I was doing. And that was preserving the memory of those who had gone before us and made the ultimate sacrifice to do something that would be outstanding enough that would call attention to what they were doing just in order to preserve the memories of those who had gone before us. They come in from all different directions around the country, and their 2,000 riders converge on the memorial in Washington, D.C. That year, we raised something like $1.2 million. It's now up to $2.5 million and 2,500 riders. It is a phenomenal experience. And in the elation, in the afterglow of that experience, I discovered that there was a bike trail that went from Washington, D.C. to Pittsburgh. And I started researching this thing, and I called my brother, Eddie, who had just gotten done doing a bike ride of his own. I said, we have to do this. We're going to do this bike ride, and we're going to do it in Martha's memory. And that was 2014, after the amazing inspiration of my first Police Unity Tour. And so fast forward to 2018. For 4 years, I've been riding in the Police Unity Tour, doing my research and homework on this bike trail, which just seemed like an impossible thing to do. It's 330 miles, and you're on your own, and you have to figure it out. You can either pack a bunch of gear on your bike and camp along the trail, or you can stop at various bed and breakfasts. And so it's an off-road trail that follows the Chesapeake and Ohio Canal all along the Potomac River, all the way to Cumberland, Maryland, where it ends. And then it follows along the Great Allegheny Passage, which is a rails to trails bike trail from Cumberland, Maryland, all the way to Pittsburgh. 2 different trails. The first one being 184.5 miles. The second one being 150 miles. It's 5 days. And so we can connect Martha's name on the wall in Washington, D.C. to Martha's name on the monument sign in front of the FBI building in Pittsburgh with this bike trail. We've done it now for 4 years, and we're going to do it for the 5th year this year. My daughter, Shauna, has ridden in Martha's Ride. She has also ridden in the Police Unity Tour ride with me, first as a surviving family member and then as a police officer. She's a New Jersey State Trooper. got a call from the family to let me know that the FBI had been planning a new field office for Pittsburgh and that they were going to name it after Martha. And we were thrilled. Martha had been known in Pittsburgh as Martha Dixon, not Martha Dixon Martinez, as her official credentials will show, because she had only been married a brief period of time. My mother made the decision the building would be named the Martha Dixon Building. The dedication of the building took place in November 2001. It was a very elaborate and ornate ceremony. We were kind of blown away, really, with the ceremony and the dignitaries that showed up and the people who spoke and the reverence with which the building was dedicated. Very graciously, once again, the FBI, as it has always been to our family, they invited our father, Jerome Dixon, to provide the blessing and the prayers over the building and the invocation. It was a very sacred event. It had been 7 years, almost to the day. And so we were all gathered around an event that gave us the opportunity to experience something that had been rare for us, and that is the moment of joy that we were able to experience, knowing that Martha's name would live on in this building and that there was a real honor being bestowed upon her. And that was something that we'll never forget. We received a very nice photo from Director Mueller with him and my mother standing in front of this sign with Martha's name on it, shaking hands in a very warm embrace. I think this photo of the two of them in front of the sign is emblematic of the feelings that the whole ceremony evoked for us. One of the pictures that I provided you of the bike ride was a ceremonial presentation of a Martha's Ride jersey to the FBI field office. And I had the jersey framed and a very nice display that would be displayed in their lobby thereafter. Martha Dixon, like so many other souls in the law enforcement community, went to work one day on a routine day and never came home. And as a result of what she did, she sacrificed her life to save the lives of other people and never hesitated for an instant to do so. It was in her character as a person, and it was in her training to run towards the gunfire when a door to get out of there was only 2 or 3 steps away. She ran towards the gunfire to help her friends, because that's who Martha was. More importantly, that's who law enforcement is, running towards the danger. And they give everything they have, including their lives, to protect us from those dangers. They deserve a special measure of recognition. They deserve everything we can do within our power to remember them, to preserve their memory and honor their service and their sacrifice. More importantly to me, Martha Dixon. She was my sister. I knew her intimately, and I loved her dearly, and I will never stop missing her. We've experienced so much support through all these years that we have rediscovered the joys of living. But we will never, never forget the moment of agony of learning about her death and the tragic way that she was killed. And I just hope that people will recognize that's what law enforcement is about. The willingness to give everything for you and me to be protected so we can walk down the street and feel at least some modest amount of safety in a dangerous world.
And that's the end of the tribute to Martha Dixon. There's a link in your podcast app's description of this episode to the show notes at jerrywilliams.com, where you'll find photos of Martha, images from the Dixon family's annual run and bike ride in her honor, a link to where you can donate to the Martha Fund, and news articles about the many beautiful memorials honoring Martha, Mike Miller, and Hank Daley. I also highlight the other female agent service martyrs in the FBI's Hall of Honor. I hope you enjoyed the interview and that you'll share it with your friends, family, and associates. You can show me just how much you liked it by buying me a coffee. There's a link in your podcast app's description of this episode, or you can visit jerrywilliams.com and tap on the little coffee cup icon in the bottom right-hand corner of my website. Don't forget to follow FBI Retired Case File Review on your favorite podcast app. Now, this podcast is all about true crime, But if you're also interested in crime fiction, once a month via my reader team email, I keep you up to date on the FBI and books, TV, and movies. When you join my reader team, you get access to my FBI reading resource, a colorful list of more than 70 books about the FBI written by FBI agents who have been guests on this podcast. There's nonfiction, crime fiction, true crime, and memoirs. You'll also get my FBI reality checklist where I debunk 20 cliches about the FBI and receive news about what I'm up to and about my FBI nonfiction and crime fiction books. I want to thank you for listening to the very end. I hope you come back for another episode of FBI Retired Case File Review with Jerry Williams. Thank you.